This world that we live in is full of all kinds of distractions, fleeting pleasures, just like things that like come in an instant that seem like a good idea, but then we realize that they lead to pain and deception and suffering. And as parents and caregivers, we don't just want our kids to have a good life. We want them to have a better life than ours. We want them to thrive. And so, we are focused on our children's happiness, but our responsibility is to equip them for more. Sometimes if we're not careful, we just like focus a little bit too much on their immediate happiness and not on their long-term development, and this is where we kind of get into trouble. Matthew 17 verse 11 says it like this: so if you sinful people know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more would your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him? And so he's saying, like, you're broken and sinful, and that's us, that's me, right? I'm not perfect, but the Father in heaven is perfect, and he wants more for me than I could ever want for myself. He wants to lavish blessings upon me and take care of me and write my life in such a way that it has an eternal story, not just a temporal story. And so when I say that we need to worry less about today's happiness and more about tomorrow's readiness, I think sometimes as parents, it's easy to get in a role where we behave a little bit more like grandparents. Now, hear me out, right? Traditionally, it's mom and dad's job to discipline and develop and grow the kid. And then the grandparents, because they're one generation removed, they get to spoil and do all that fun stuff, right? But I look at our world, not to sound too much like an old man for a minute, but I look at our world and I see a lot of parents that are behaving like grandparents. They want their kids to have everything, and they want their kids' lives to be easy, and they want their kids' lives to just be full of everything you could ever want, all the latest and greatest and all the nice stuff, and they aren't really interacting, teaching, developing their kids. And in this series, this is our last week in it actually, I want to talk to you about the kind of gifts that you could give your kid. Gifts that are powerful and dynamic and life-changing. Like, there is I know it's hard to believe, but you can give your kids too much. And the kids that are living in our world today have everything you could imagine at their fingertips. Now, I'm talking about your and my children. I'm not talking about the poor kids that are suffering in other places in the world. My and your children live a life of luxury and lavish. And maybe you don't think that. Maybe you're like, well, I live in a little apartment where there's barely enough food and room for us, but you live in an apartment. Don't forget, we're the church that helps build houses for those who don't have them. We're the church that's bringing water to people who are drinking out of the same stream that their sewer dumps into. We're the church that believes in changing the world one person at a time and going out into the places and spaces where people are marginalized and forgotten. So it's easy for us to forget that we're blessed. And so you can give your kids too much. You can bless them too much. And then what happens is they become like, this is the word Grandma would have used, spoiled. They become spoiled. I like to say it a little bit more like this. There's a way for you to give, and there's a way when you give that it actually hurts, not helps. And so let me give you 3 things, and then we'll kind of dive in today, that if you're not careful, giving your kids too much can actually hurt them. And that's when you give them things, number 1, if you're taking notes, when you give them things they didn't earn. Now, again, I understand how gifts work. Gifts don't have, a price tag or something attached to them, because then their paycheck's not gifts. But when I say you give them things that they didn't earn, one of the best things that you can do for your children is teach them to earn, what they are getting. And so, like, you're building into them a work ethic by telling them, like, hey guys, we're going to go do this great thing, but not unless we all do our chores. Or, hey, if we accomplish this task or this series of goals, we're going to do this. If we all put change in this jar, when the jar's full, then we're going to go to Disneyland. And I don't even care if the jar has enough money in it to go to Disneyland. Just make them put the money in the jar so that they have ownership in going to Disneyland. You gotta have them have some ownership. And you got to be careful not to give them too much praise, number 2, that they don't deserve. We can overpraise our kids in such a way that they just feel like everyone should constantly praise them all the time. And then that's not reality. They're going to have a job where no one gives them praise. They're going to have to live in a world where not everyone's saying, good job, buddy. Right? And again, this isn't an indictment against modern day parenting. I'm just saying, in my lifetime and in my experience, and again, I will say this, oftentimes people say to me, Pastor Eric, we love your children. How'd they turn out so good? Well, I wanted to make sure that these were things I didn't do too much of. I didn't want to give them too much of something they didn't earn or too much praise that they didn't deserve. You want to be authentic and real with your kid. If your kid is not good at basketball, quit telling them that they're going to be the next great basketball player. Don't give them praise that they don't deserve and that they didn't earn. You can give them encouragement. You can tell them to keep practicing, keep trying. But there's the truth is like, if your kid comes in and they drew a picture of a horse and it looks like the back of a cow, don't tell them that they're going to be the next great artist. Don't give them praise that they didn't earn, that they don't deserve, because then what happens is that they crave that praise, and then they're going to get to an age where you feel like you should be authentic with them, and they're going to feel like you lied to them. Number 3, if you're taking notes, don't give them freedoms that they can't handle. Your job is to guide them, lead them, and it doesn't really matter what everybody else is doing. You know your kid better than your neighbors, their friends' parents know that your kids. And so don't give your kids freedoms that they can't handle. This comes to music, this comes to screen time, this comes to movies, this comes to foods, bedtimes. You have to establish what the fence posts in the playground are so that they can play. And when you give them too much of these things, too much gifts that they didn't earn, too much praise that they don't deserve, and too much freedom that they can't handle, you actually wind up hurting your kids, not helping your kids. Go back with me to that verse in Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Shema. He says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Love God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength. These commands that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children." When you sit at home, when you walk along the path, when you lie down, and when you get up, tie them as symbols on your hands, bind them to your foreheads, write them on your door frames of your houses and on your gates. And so what he's talking about when Moses is giving Joshua this lesson on how to take care of the next generation, what he's talking about is this concept of how to give good gifts to your children that help them become the men and women of God that he's calling them to be. So we talked about gifts that if you give too much are dangerous. Let's talk about gifts that you can give your children. 3 gifts that you could give your children that are going to help them to love God with all of their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Number 1 is community, a community worth having. Like, this is why your attendance at church, physical, in-person services, and life groups are so important. Now, I know that there's reasons sometimes that we can't come to an in-person service, and this is a great opportunity to sit and be Hope at Home. Or some of you are watching this because you're in a house church that's part of our Hope at Home community, or maybe you're in a home group and you're watching this preparing for your home group that's coming this week. Whatever the reason is but being in a community, because you weren't designed to do life alone. So when Deuteronomy 6:4 says, "Hear, O Israel," the place where God dwells, the community of people that are God's people, the church. The Lord our God is one. Who and what you expose your children to will shape who they become and what they believe. And so who is it that you're exposing your children to? Some of us and again, no judgment here, just observation. Some of us, in the name of getting wealthy, have outsourced the development of our kids because we don't have enough time to raise our kids. So they spend 24/7 with someone else. And I'm going to tell you something. You only have a certain number of hours every day with your kids, and a certain number of hours every week, and a certain number of hours every month and every year. And you only have a certain number of years until your kids move out of your house and they're no longer under your control. They'll always be your kids, but you won't have the ability to guide them and lead them for long. And in this world, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter. They may live in your house still, but it's getting difficult to guide and lead your kids once they pass the age of 14. They become their own little adults at that point. And so when you surround them with a community, you have other people that can help you speak into the life of those children and that you trust because you've built this community. This is the beautiful thing. Proverbs 13:20 says, walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools and get in trouble. You can't pick your child's friends, and you don't really, if they're in public school system, you don't even really get much option in their teachers. But you can pick the other influences that you're going to put in your child's life. And so surrounding your children with men and women of God, with leaders and church members and home group friends that are all going to pour into your kid and love your kid and take care of your kid is a powerful tool into making sure that your kids learn to love God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Number 2, if you're taking notes, 3 gifts to give your kids. Number 1 was community, and number 2 is a standard worth achieving. When you read that verse, Deuteronomy 6:5, it says, love God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. What would it look like for you and I to start to live that out, to model it for our children? Last week we talked a little bit about that we don't model strong enough for our kids. Do your kids see you loving God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength? You know, my dad used to tell this story when we were little kids, and he would, be teaching, and he would say that he had a come to Jesus moment one time when he asked my sister to go get him his Bible, and she came back with the TV guide. Now, some of you aren't old enough to even know what a TV guide is. They used to publish this little book, and it would tell you what channels were on TV, what shows were going to play at what times. Long before DVR, long before even cable, you had this TV guide. And he had this stark reality reminder that she saw him look at the TV guide more than she saw him read his Bible, and that changed him. I've spent my life trying to model for my children what this looks like. I was very intentional when my kids were little, as much as I possibly could, for them to see me early in the morning doing my devotions, reading my Bible, spending time in prayer, often in the living room with the dim lights and me and my cup of coffee. Why? Because I wanted them to see what it looked like. I spent a significant amount of my time when I was raising my kids. I don't say this to pat myself on the back. I'm saying this so that I'm trying to model for you, because in a way you are my children. What it looks like to be generous, what it looks like to share, what it looks like to honor God with your lives, what it looks like to sacrifice for others, to travel to places in the world and to give to those who have been forgotten about and marginalized, and to be able to serve in such a way that they get to see it. I wanted my kids to walk along the road with me and go to bed at night and ride in the car with me and have conversations with me that were about loving God with all of their heart, mind, soul, and strength. I wanted them to have that. Why? Because I wanted them to have a faith that was worth sharing, a faith that was worth talking about. That's the gift that you could give your kids. Number 3, a faith that's worth sharing, a faith that's worth talking about. And so when he says that, impress it upon your children, when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up, he's saying that, have a relationship with Jesus where it's active and alive and there's actually something to share. That your testimony isn't just the story of when you gave your life to Jesus, but your testimony is the story of how you overcame the test of today. How was your day today? What happened? What'd you learn? What's going on? Oh man, I had a hard day at work. It was raining and the forklift broke down. But you know what? We prayed and the forklift started back up. That's part of your testimony. Share that with your kids. Share the stories of God's blessing. I didn't know how we were going to have enough money to go visit the grandparents. But you know what? I got a bonus at work and now we have enough money. And you remember I asked you to pray with me about that new raise, that new money that we were going to be getting, and it came in. God provided because we did hard work and we honor God with our lives. Have a faith that's worth sharing. Model for them what it looks like to be one who loves God with every fiber of your being. And I'll be honest with you, your kids, they really do want to be like you until they figure out that the you that they want to be like is not really you. When you're authentic and genuine and real, I'm telling you, your kids will model their lives after you. Will they stray? Will they make mistakes? Will they have bumps and bruises along the way? 100%. But when you're authentic with your kids and you live real life, your kids will model after their lives after you. I mean, think about it. When your kids are little, I remember when the boys were little, the boys would want to stand like me and act like me and talk like me and position their bodies when they were standing in a circle with other guys talking about life. I'd look down and they'd be just like me with their hands in their pockets or their arms folded, you know. Why? Well, because when you surround your kids with authentic life, they want to model that life. But my question is, are you giving your kids gifts that are hurting them, or are you giving your kids gifts that are helping them? Parenthood is hard enough without you hurting yourself by trying to give your kids gifts that don't make a difference in their long-term development. Give your kids the gift of God's grace and forgiveness and understanding. Give them the gift of modeling what it looks like to love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Give them the gift of real faith, faith that can be lived out, talked about, and walked out in real everyday life. Give them the gift of Jesus.